So, picture this. November 4th, 2025. A political earthquake just absolutely rocked New York City to its core. This wasn't just about who sits in Gracie Mansion. It was an event that questioned the very identity of America's largest city.
And right at the heart of this was a guy named Zohran Mamdani. At just 34 years old, he pulled off what has to be one of the most jaw-dropping victories in modern American politics.
Now, this guy wasn't some product of the city's political machine. He hadn't spent decades climbing the ladder. He was a foreclosure prevention housing counselor, an activist. His entire political education came from fighting evictions right there in Queens.
And here's the kicker, the part that sent shockwaves across the entire country. He's a democratic socialist elected to run the undisputed capital of global finance. I mean, think about that. It was this massive rejection of the political consensus that had run New York for generations.
So what we're going to do here is break down not just who Zohran Mamdani is, but the incredible forces that launched him into power. And maybe more importantly, the immense, almost impossible challenges he's facing right now trying to govern.
All right, so the big question, how did he actually pull this off? Because this was no accident. It was the result of a revolutionary new kind of campaign, this perfect blend of the old and the new.
Okay, so on one side, you had what they called the digital air war. His team was all over TikTok using edutainment to explain really complex policies. They were collaborating with influencers, using this amazing branding inspired by bodegas and the MTA, to create this real sense of city pride. But then, on the other side, they had this incredibly old-school ground game. We're talking over 500 field leads, training thousands of volunteers that have these deep, meaningful conversations at the door. And the whole thing was powered by 180,000 small-dollar donors.
And what was the result of all this? Well, you can see it right here. It wasn't just a win. It was decisive. This hybrid strategy drove the highest voter turnout the city had seen since 1969. 2.2 million New Yorkers? That's just staggering. But the real key to this whole thing was who actually came out to vote. He built a completely new kind of coalition. He won an astronomical 78% of young voters. He absolutely dominated in what's known as the crescent of displacement. These working-class neighborhoods in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx that are facing insane gentrification. For them, his promise of a rent freeze, that wasn't just a policy, it was a lifeline. And so importantly, his economic message, this populist, socialist message, it actually stopped the rightward drift we've been seeing among Latino voters. He managed to unite the young, the diverse, and the economically insecure all under one single banner, the fight to make the city affordable.
Okay, but here's the thing. Winning an election is one thing. Actually governing is a whole different ballgame. Mamdani now has the enormous challenge of turning a protest movement into a government that actually works. And that, let me tell you, is a really dangerous path.
So his first big test, building a cabinet. And his strategy was pretty interesting. He went for a team of rivals approach, blending these radical thinkers that his base absolutely loves with seasoned technocrats who are meant to calm down the city's very nervous establishment. And this right here really captures the tension at the very heart of his new government. Just look. He keeps Jessica Tisch as police commissioner. She's a billionaire heiress, an advocate for broken windows policing, and he does that to protect himself from soft-on-crime attacks, but it totally enrages his base. Then he brings in Dean Fullahan, a super experienced budget director, basically to send a signal of stability to Wall Street and Albany. And then he creates a brand new position for Julie Su, the former acting U.S. Labor Secretary, which signals this huge shift from just attracting corporations to actually protecting workers. It is a very, very delicate and maybe explosive balancing act from day one.
But probably his single biggest structural change is this idea right here, the affordability calculator. He wants to completely change how the city even measures success. Forget GDP. His administration is going to measure its own performance by how much money its policies, we're talking universal childcare, free transit, how much money that leaves in the pockets of working families. It's a really radical reframing of what city government is even for.
Of course, a revolution is always met with a counter-revolution, and Mamdani's entire agenda is already hitting a wall of really powerful, coordinated opposition.
So, let's talk about the absolute central promise of his campaign, a 4-year rent freeze for millions of tenants. The question is, can he actually make it happen?
Well, the short answer is it's going to be incredibly difficult. See, in his final weeks in office, the outgoing mayor made a very calculated move to basically sabotage this exact policy. He stacked the one single board that can approve a rent freeze, the Rent Guidelines Board, with new members who are ideologically against the entire idea.
And this just lays out how completely tied his hands are. So, could he fire the board? Well, it's a huge legal risk and a court would probably stop him. Could he challenge their appointments in court? Yeah, but that's a super slow and uncertain process. So his most likely option is to just apply public pressure, which, unfortunately for him, is also his weakest. So his signature promise, it's pretty much blocked for the first 2 years of his term, at least.
And then you've got the fiscal reality check. Mamdani's agenda, right? It's estimated to cost around $9 billion. But his tax plans, which have to get approved by the state, they're only projected to bring in about $5 to $6 billion, on a good day. And all of this is happening while he inherits a deficit of over $2 billion. The math? Well, it's brutal.
So this all sets up the final conflict. You see, his time as mayor isn't just a battle for New York City. It's a fight for survival on 3 separate and very hostile fronts.
Just look at this political landscape. Up in Albany, you've got Governor Hochul. She needs his voters, but she's publicly against his tax plans. Down in Washington, President Trump is back in the White House and is already threatening to cut federal funding to cities that don't cooperate. And then, of course, there's Wall Street. Publicly, they're all for cooperation, but privately, they're getting ready for what's called a capital strike, threatening to pull their money and assets right out of the city if his policies go too far.
And you know, it really all comes down to this idea, the poetry of the campaign. All the viral videos, the cool branding, the huge rallies, it is now slammed head-on into the hard, grinding, and let's be honest, often unglamorous prose of governance. The big question is, can the ideals of a movement survive the cold, hard reality of running this incredibly complex city? Which leaves us with one final huge question. Is Zohran Mamdani's victory the new blueprint for the American left, a model that can actually win and govern? Or is this red rose, planted right in the heart of the capital of capital, just going to wilt under the immense pressure from all the forces lined up against it? The answer to that question will define not just the future of New York, but maybe, just maybe, the future of American politics itself.